I call this I call this first slide Top of the Pops 1974 for the simple reason that the assembled digging crew could be mistaken for a local band doing a quirky photo shoot. I can tell you that none of the 7 in the photo had an archaeology degree, and only 2, myself on the extreme left and the serious one in the middle, Stuart Brown, presumably the band manager in this scenario, went on to pursue a career in archaeology. The 1970s in Exeter saw almost continuous major open-air excavations in advance of development, led by directors of the units, Michael Griffith and the late Chris Henderson. Pioneering work also took place in building recording, and that was primarily by John Thorpe. But it was the discovery of the stone-built military bathhouse at Cathedral Close, which you see here on the left, excavated by Paul Bidwell, and the traces of wooden cohort barracks at the Guildhall site on the right, excavated by John Collis and Chris Henderson, which put Exeter on the map as the confirmed site of a legionary fortress, and in my case, inspired a love affair with Roman military archaeology. It was during those, what might questionably, given post-excavation resources, might be termed halcyon days for excavation, that I discovered with within one of the Guildhall excavation sites, a pipe clay headless figurine of Venus. It was found in the upper levels of a well, infilled in the late 2nd or early 3rd century. Now, not surprisingly, it caused something of a sensation in the local press, and anyone who's ever dealt with local journalists will know that they can let their imagination run wild with stories like this. But to be fair, most of the reporting here, and you can see the rather dated cutting from the time, most of the reporting here is actually quoting the museum director of the time, Stephen Locke. I suspect that everyone in the audience will be familiar with these not uncommon Venus statuettes, figurines. The goddess is shown naked, her right hand raised to touch a tress of hair, and her left lowered by her side to hold a drape. And she was thought to be an imported example from Gaul of the late 1st or early 2nd century. I was never quite sure, I'm just trying to see, yes, with my cursor. I was never quite sure whether we were dealing with a residual object from the time of the fortress or a curated object from the 2nd century, discarded perhaps when the head was lost in the 3rd. If she had a military owner and hadn't traveled far, she would have been in the area of a building, possibly on the left-hand side here of the slide, possibly in the area of the residence of the legionary commander, which might therefore be associated with high-status building and occupant. So I'm not really sure about that, given that the Legion left Exeter around AD 75 for a new base in Caerleon, then perhaps she had a civilian context and a civilian owner. And if so, on the right-hand side, she was found just within Insula 8 and the likely location of Roman townhouses to the left of the Forum and Basilica of the city, the Civitas capital, of course. The Exeter Venus was rare, but she was sorry, was not rare, but she was unique for Exeter, and her loss only 3 days after her discovery was grievous, and this is the way it happened. The museum had put on a private evening display for invited guests and the media, not for the Venus herself, but for the future public display of the uncovered legionary bathhouse in Cathedral Green. And the centerpiece was a model of the bathhouse, which you can see here on the left, and plans were already being costed up for the museum building, which was to overlie the ruined walls. And this funding, there were clearly difficulties in raising this amount of money locally and by the council. And so the invitation was for benefactors to provide further. The Venus figure was added as an added bonus, also on display. Now, the following morning, she was, however, nowhere to be found. An appeal was put out in the Express and Echo, the same newspaper which had reported her discovery. The appeal for her return, and I think a sick cat has just arrived. We haven't had this before, so I'll just deal with that and get back to you in a second. My apologies. The appeal for the Venus's return mentioned in the press that she might have been packed away by a West Country TV crew from Plymouth who may have mistaken her for a light bulb. And this led to her unlikely appearance in the satirical magazine Private Eye, who considered such an unlikely occurrence to be worthy of a further audience. Of course, I always lived in hope that the Venus figure would reappear one day. And when I returned to Exeter in 2001, after many years away, I thought that there was a possibility that she might still be in the city. After all, she had no monetary value to speak of. So it was off to the local newspaper again with a plea for her return, but sadly, nothing came of it. Who knows, and this is my final slide, I may have one last try at finding her and getting her back to where she belongs in the city of Exeter and in its new award-winning museum. If she ever did turn up, I would know her instantly, as she has a small scar on the lower abdomen, just here, if I can get the cursor just here. As far as I know, however, the Romans did not practice the removal of the appendix by surgery, but perhaps someone over coffee may tell me otherwise. I think I may be just about on time or just before, so I'm going to say enjoy. It's coffee break next. Enjoy your coffee or indeed tea, and at the end of this I'm heading for the Earl Grey. Thank you.
Thank you, John. What a mystery indeed. Did somebody get in touch with said film crew to find out if it was in a light bulb box?
Yes, everything was tried, and unfortunately nothing ever